Lauren Necochea, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you for being here. My goodness. You are the leader of the Democratic Party in the state of Idaho, correct?
I am.
So you are essentially Dorothy Moon's counterpart.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And to be clear, I have invited Dorothy on several times, and she has not taken me up on my offer. Well, I hope she will one day. But right now, I get to talk to you about the Democratic Party in Idaho. Now, look, I make no qualms about this. I did move from California. I did experience a version of the Democratic Party. The Democrats in Idaho are not that. I've done several interviews with, for instance, Melissa Wintrow and Representative Mathias. I really like these people. Pragmatic, reasonable, good people to chat with. It's a different version of the Democratic Party than I see in other places of the country. But again, there are things that need to be flushed out. So coming into 2025, and especially on the heels of the presidential election, what are the things that you guys are looking for, the Democratic Party is really valuing and trying to bring to the forefront and engage in the marketplace of ideas?
Yeah, I think we have, our priority is to restore balance to Idaho's politics. We've just seen it go off the cliff towards the far right. And so part of what we need to continue to do is to meet voters at the door, meet them where they are, and have those conversations so we can talk about the solutions that we support that are going to make life easier, make raising a family more affordable in the state that has experienced tremendous growth. And that puts pressure on everything, right? It makes it harder to pay for childcare, harder to pay for your rent or to buy a home. And then the other piece of that growth is that it has a certain political bent to it, and we are just seeing the folks who see Idaho as, and I don't include you in this group, but I do see the migration of people who see folks as fertile ground for far right politics, people who get here and say this place isn't conservative enough. And they want to grow extremism here in Idaho and bring ideas that have nothing to do with what traditional Republicans in Idaho believe or care about. And so we're up against we have several challenges. One, we're in an extreme minority. When we hold 15 seats in the legislature, we have no power to even get a bill that we want heard. We have to have Republican support for anything we do, and anything meaningful Republicans tend to want to lead on and not let us put our names on. So it's just that challenge of bit by bit, incrementally getting to a place where we can break the supermajority, get bills heard that we want to have heard, and solve problems that we see in Idaho. And then also we have to do that education, because it's just harder and harder for people to access information, or they've turned themselves off from accessing information about what's going on in politics because it seems ugly or confusing. And
I mean, both.
and we saw that, in the national election, that people who said but in their own self-assessment, I don't pay attention to politics, they tended to vote for the Republican. And the people who said, I do pay attention, tended to vote Democratic. So we need to make sure we get the information in ways that people can access it and want to learn more. So I think figuring out how we deliver our messages is the focus.
If I may ask, what are those messages? Like, what do you feel like you guys are like screaming from the mountaintops and people aren't hearing that you would want people to hear? Because again, we had Prop 1, right? And I had Rod Beck and Hiram Erickson on to do a debate. And Rod's primary question to Hiram is like, okay, look, I understand you're saying there's this problem with independent voters, and you're saying, again, this was Rod speaking to Hiram. He said, Hiram, you're saying that we have an imbalance and are essentially producing bad legislation because we have this imbalance. But what legislation do you dislike? Now, that's obviously an impossible question to answer, because Hiram pointed out, he's like, do you want me to recount every bill that's been brought forward since 2012? Like, I can't do that, right? And that's a question, though, that I think is a really good one, which is, okay, if we don't like the current system because it creates an imbalance, what are things that you think are representative of that imbalance? Or like, what are things that you guys are trying to get people to understand or hear that they're just not hearing or understanding?
Yeah, I think at a fundamental level, we're focused on the needs of working families. And what you've seen Republican Party pushed through year after year over the last few years is deep revenue cuts that threaten our ability to fund our local schools. We have, raw sewage under the cafeteria in the elementary school in Salmon. We have, just well-documented infrastructure problems with our school buildings being unsafe for kids, like the Pocatello High School that burned down because of a faulty electrical system that was well known, but they didn't have the money to fix it. So we don't have the funds we need to take care of schools. Meanwhile, Republicans push through deep revenue cuts, always tilted towards the wealthy. So there was some analysis of the kind of the sum impact of the income tax cuts they've passed over the past few years. And if you're in the bottom 20% of earners, you got $47 total or something in that range. And I think the top 1% has gotten, $10,000 in benefits. So just that upside down prioritization of needs and what we do with our revenue.
May I ask a quick question? With regard to tax, we have a tiered tax system, right? So if we're saying, hey, the bottom 20%, like there's probably a portion of the Idaho population that doesn't even owe income tax to Idaho on an annual basis because they make very little, right? So for that, whatever portion of people, because they have deductions or whatever they might be. So for that portion of people, the number is not even 47, it's $0 of tax relief, right? Because they are paying very little money, right? And then obviously for the people that are earning more, they are paying more taxes, so they stand to get more from tax relief. So if we're talking about tax relief, if we're like, okay, we're going to decrease taxes, immediately we'll have an imbalance because there's a portion of the population that isn't even paying taxes, right? So that's just inherent in that action, which is like, well, let's offer some tax relief. We'll always be able to criticize that and say, well, it benefits the wealthy. It's like, well, they're the ones paying the bulk of the taxes.
So we used to have a tiered income tax structure.
We just have a flat tax?
We have a flat tax.
Gotcha.
They changed that a couple years ago. So that's
Okay.
part of what
shows
kind
you
of the
what kind of
upside
idiot
down
I am. But I am right, though, that would still maintain a portion of the population that has an income but enough deductions that they're not going to pay a tax, correct?
It's very, very small. And what you have to remember is that people don't only pay income tax. They pay sales tax, they pay property tax, and the Republicans kind of have an orientation towards let's always lower income tax. And then the only tax increase I've seen them do in this century is to increase the sales tax. So right now, you pay a higher rate on your sales tax on food. You go and buy milk and eggs and bread and meat for sandwiches for your kids, just real basic stuff. You're going to pay a higher tax rate on those necessities, maybe throw in diapers, medicines, a higher tax rate on those necessities than the billionaire pays on their, 1 billionth dollar that they earn. And that to me is backwards, that all of the tax cuts almost always go into lowering that flat tax rate. So helping, corporations pay less on their so a corporation pays less on their profits than you pay on the necessities that you buy at the grocery store. And this has been true in the context where our property taxes, went through the roof as, our housing market skyrocketed. And what the Republicans did, seeing, kind of how things work over time, is they took our homeowners exemption that says this is the amount, that first amount of your home value that you don't have to pay taxes on. They capped it. So for years it was tied to home prices. So when home prices won't go up, your homeowner's exemption goes up to kind of protect you and insulate you from that rising value. So if the housing market just goes wild, it doesn't mean your property taxes also skyrocket. Well, the Republicans in 2016, every Democrat voted against this because we could see what would happen to regular homeowners. And they said, okay, we're going to take away that index. We're going to take away that adjustment to the homeowner's exemption. We're going to cap it. So it doesn't matter how wild the housing market goes, your homeowner's exemption is capped. And then what immediately happened, the tax load shifted onto homeowners because that's the way property taxes work. So property owners were seeing these huge year-over-year increases in their property taxes. We could have taken state money and found ways to. Well, what we should have done was reindex the property tax or the homeowner's exemption. but we could have done a lot of other things with state dollars to ease that pressure and help people stay in their homes. And instead, it's always an income tax cut. That's always where they go. We could have taken the sales tax off of groceries with this revenue that they cut, but that's never the priority. It's always the income tax cut that overwhelmingly, disproportionately benefits, the people at the top and corporations.
May I ask two things? So I was not aware of the vote. And again, I got here like 15 minutes ago. So please, I apologize.
And we welcome you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But to be fair, I do believe it was Representative Moyle who passed HB 389, which was the bill that helped cap how much, because of the Constitution in in Idaho that says you can't treat, each property must be treated similarly. And it's instead of something like Prop 13 in California that allows your tax base to be established and when you purchased your home, in Idaho, you have to treat each property similarly, whether you've owned it for 10 minutes or whether you've owned it for 10 years. And because of that, he passed a bill that would prevent municipalities and taxing districts from raising up their budgets more than a certain portion drawing off of property taxes. So although it sounds like there was this cap that was put on the homeowners exemption, it does also sound like that, him as a Republican, very classic Republican in Idaho, it did attempt to curb the increase in property tax as well. What do you think about whenever people talk about, hey, you're hurting, the homeowners or like, you're capping, you're essentially letting the property taxes run wild. Property taxes are paid by property owners, right? So to say like, hey, we should increase this tax exemption or the homeowners exemption for homeowners with their primary properties, and that's going to cost the state a certain amount of revenue that we would have gained otherwise. That also only benefits people that own homes, right? Or am I missing something? Because what you're saying is in 2016, they passed legislation that capped or froze the homeowners exemption. Mm-hmm. And that ended up costing the state a little, or that ended up costing the homeowner a little bit more, right? But that's for people that don't even own hard assets like that. It's like they probably were not against that per se, right? I mean, the lower end or younger people that are getting on with their lives.
They may not have noticed this, but what happened is you saw, because property taxes are budget based, so you saw this shift. So you saw a homeowner watch their property taxes go up, I don't know, 17%. I'm just throwing that out.
Right.
That's not a crazy number. That happened. And then the big box store down the street saw its property tax bill go down 10%. And it's the unfairness of that. And that's that was disturbing to our caucus, that why we're, it's one, this over here pays for this over here. So this increase in the homeowner property taxes it's clearly just being paid for by this cut over here.
Wait, why did the commercial properties go down in property tax?
Because and this, we're at the risk of getting boring for your listeners.
I don't think so. This is very important to
me. Because the way property tax budgets work is a municipality, a county says, this is how much we need for police, fire, to keep the library open. And then they're figuring that out at the same time that the property values out there are being added up, right? And then it just becomes a division problem. You take the budget and divide it across the market value.
Sure.
So if my homeowner's exemption is fixed here, then I have to pay taxes on a bigger portion of my home value. And that also, people are pouring into the state, home values are going up. So now I'm paying, as a homeowner, or you're paying as a homeowner, this much, or the tax rate applies to this much value. Whereas you don't have, big box stores don't have that same sort of market pressure. So their values aren't skyrocketing. And so we pay more. That means that what they have to pay on their value is less.
Okay, you lost me in the last piece. So as the taxes go up based on the budget after a House Bill 389, right? So like, say I have 100 houses. Okay, they're going to have to distribute, let's say I have 100 houses and I have $1 million budget. Okay, those 100 houses have to fund that $1 million budget, police, fire, all that stuff. And that budget can only increase a little bit each year after HB 389.
It was always, it was always the case that there were
checks and balances. So if we go from 100 houses to 200 houses, but that bill, that overall budget bill is only increasing by a certain amount, that doesn't mean that just because we have more houses and the prices or the values are going up, that our property tax bill goes up, because the property tax bill is determined by how much that budget might be. And this is why you have instances where property values might come down, but your property tax actually may still increase, because again, it's distributing the values across, the budget, right? So what happens with the commercial that allows the commercial property tax bill to go down?
Because it's not twice as many houses generally that's happening. It's that those houses, let's say for easy math, they were worth $100,000. Now they're worth $200,000.
Sure.
And then you've got this building over here went from being worth $1 million to $1.5 million, right? And so when you spread out, now you've got twice as much home value that you're spreading things across, and only 50% more commercial value.
Gotcha.
And so the
delta, the change in valuation, gross valuation is ultimately how it's determined.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So proportionally
it's the proportionality of it.
Okay. So when you say the property tax went down, you're saying the property tax proportion to the value of the commercial perhaps decreased, whereas the property tax value, like the $200,000 house is obviously paying less property tax than the $1.5 million commercial space.
I'll get you data on this because it's really interesting. And it's changed differently over the past couple of years just as markets have changed, but I'm talking about the literal tax bills that people pay, what they have to pay, what people have to pay versus what the corporation has to pay.
Gotcha.
And I didn't make up all of this stuff and say this was important. But we have Republican county commissioners coming and testifying at the legislature and saying, look, this isn't fair. That I'm getting these calls from, my constituents who are saying, why is my property tax bill going up? And then they look at, the business across the street that's paying less and they're not feeling good about it. Yeah, right. We've got seniors on fixed incomes trying to just stay in their home. They didn't do anything to make their neighborhood the new hot bedroom community.
Right. Star didn't do anything intentionally to double in size in the last 4 years.
That's, not part of the plan. But right. I mean, you brought up HB 389, and I think what that was really kind of smoke and mirrors and a way to avoid addressing this tax shift. And what and I'm not going to say they're the unintended consequences, because they're the intended consequences of the proponents of that bill. But all it does is say, okay, you can't increase your, whatever, doesn't matter what your citizens want. It doesn't matter what the locally elected government wants in terms of police, fire, just all those local services. We're going to artificially cap how much you can invest in those as the state. And so I don't like that because I want local control, but also because it creates these artificial things that make it really hard for small towns to grow. And can't locally they vote for a levy or a bond or something? I mean, like they can vote to increase the value of or they can vote to increase how much they're taxed. So here's where it gets really tricky. So you're a small town. Sure. You're willing to grow because you think growth is going to be good for you, and you want a developer comes and says, okay, we want to build 300 more homes. Sure. And we'll do it over 5 years. Sure. Okay. So now I'm the town. I have to say, okay, I need to make sure I have adequate police, fire. I'm actually a really small town, so I actually contract with the county for some of these services. So I can't even, decide what the price is. I have to kind of negotiate that. I've got to make a 5-year commitment to say yes to this development, but I have to every single year then go to the voters and have them approve this thing. And so I can't tell this developer, yes, you can do this, because I don't know how that vote's going to play out in year 3. And so you see, Greenleaf, the town of Greenleaf is a great example of this, where we heard, because I sat on the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, we heard about them missing out on a huge opportunity where actually if they built these houses, they could have reduced property taxes for their current residents because it would have spread out some of those fixed costs. But they were in this bind where they couldn't say yes to this new development and assure that they would be able to continue the police and fire services that are just needed for public safety because they were in this artificial, under this artificial cap that the state had put on them. And I went to Speaker Moyle and said, could we just lift this for really small towns where, a big development is going to really increase their budget by 25%, and you put a cap that says it can only be 8% or whatever it would be with the math. And he was like, no, he won't budge because that's the ideology. And that's a problem because now we have small towns that can't say yes to homes that Idahoans would probably want to buy and need to live in.
And the people of in this town, Greenleaf, the people of that town, so you had the local like mayor and board, planning and zoning, all of this stuff. And they explained this to the populace, and the populace is like, yeah, we still don't want it. Right. Because I
don't know that they could get that far because you can't, every year you'd have to have these budget increases, and you can't say voters, are you all going to vote for this now? And in 3 years from now, can you promise you're all going to vote for it again so we can green light this thing? I mean, it's just unworkable.
Gotcha. So it's not that it's not that they couldn't have done it. You're saying that the way that the voting mechanisms work, there was uncertainty, and obviously development's like, listen, if I got a 5-year project, like I'm not messing around if you can take my legs out at year 3. And you're like, all right, that makes perfect sense. And then you go to the voters, you're like, voters, what do you think about this? They're like, well, I like it today. Let's say I liked it. I might even like it next year, but I don't know that I'm going to like it in 3 years. And there was no way for them to say, okay, let's make a 5-year commitment. Everybody, let's get together, the developer, the community, and everyone. And they're like, yeah, we can't do that. So that's ultimately the issue, which is you couldn't make a long-term, like 5-year, because I know West Ada, I believe in 22, attempted to pass a 10-year bond. And the voters voted that down. They're like, look, we don't want 10 years. And they did ultimately pass, I believe, a bond or levy. I'm always terrible with the levies and bonds. But the point is they did ultimately pass a 2-year one the following year. They're like, okay, great. The voters liked the 2-year version, not the 10-year version. But they were able to ask for a 10-year plan and commitment. And the community did not like that. But again, they were able to do that. So what you're saying is HB 389 in some way prevented these people from even asking for a 5-year commitment?
That's exactly right. Because each year, the budget restrictions apply annually. And so it's this the heavy hand of the state saying, we know how we know better than you in terms of how much police, fire, response, or what fill in the blank that you want. And it's problematic. I'll never forget my first town hall as a legislator 5 years ago, going out to the Avamore, Hidden Springs area. And people were so frustrated that they had a fire district there that was underfunded. They're exposed. I mean, you go out there's a lot of sagebrush. It's an area where you want, for the protection of your property and your family and for your public safety, you want a rapid fire response. But they were up against, and this is pre, HB 389, preceded the even more restrictive budget restrictions. They couldn't fund their fire response. They were their own fire district. They couldn't fund it at the level that they wanted because they were bumping up against the budget cap every year. And they were upset.
What area is this?
It's, like kind of Avamore.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Dry
Understood.
Creek. Yeah.
And the reason I ask is because I had Chief Tominski on from the Star, fire district, and they have funding for a building. They're like, we can do the building, but we're not going to be able to afford the salaries to staff the building. And you saw the same issues in Canyon County with the emergency response with Chief Stowell, who runs their paramedics. He's like, listen, we're going to go from like a 7-minute response to like a 10-minute response or 11-minute response. And when you're talking minutes when somebody's having a heart attack or a stroke, like that quite literally could be a lifetime. Like that could be over. And they went to the voters. Both of them got shot down by the voters. They're like, yeah, no, we're not interested in doing this. And these are problems. Obviously, it's something that predated 389, but yeah, I mean, like especially with START, like they went from 11,000 people to 21,000 people in like 4 years flat. And you're like, good Lord, man. I mean, how are you managing it? Again, they're doing the best they can. I think Mayor Chadwick is fantastic and managing this really well, but it is a huge problem, especially when you're talking about a cap on budgets and an explosion of population.
Yeah. And I think it's, a heavy burden on, these small local governments to also just add another just kind of bureaucratic procedure to go through to try to solve these problems. And there's more work to do to make sure people understand what's at risk. I do think people generally want good ambulance fire response times and we, I think, have a responsibility to get out in front of that before people are dying on their way to the hospital.
Yeah.
It took too long.
What about like, I had those two conversations and I thought like, well, I don't want that to happen. And I'm not an old guy, right? Like I'm not young, but I'm not like, 80 or something. And I was thinking about the problem with it. And it's like, I guess this is part of really coming down to letting people have freedom to vote or be taxed on whatever it is. And that's an unfortunate thing. I remember chatting with somebody after the Chief Stowell interview, explaining like this response time. And then of course, Chief Tominski, and they were really upset about it. I was like, well, I mean, yes and no. Like that's like, first off, we don't live there. Okay. So fine. But the other thing really is like, these people understand, the people that are voting for this and voting it down do understand what it means. And that personal liberty to make that determination, I think, is important. Like I would want to live in a place with like a 5 to 7 minute response, but if you want to live in a place with an 11-minute response, like I'm not going to tell you you can't do that. And I'm not saying at all in any way, shape or form that you're advocating for that, but it is one of those things where it's like, okay, personal liberty, and you are at liberty to make these calls about your community. So it's, I would feel horrible for somebody that, something negative befell them. But at the same point, it's like, well, you as a community get to decide what your priorities are.
Yeah. And I think there's also, and I don't think there's a real clear answer on some of these bigger things. I don't think we need the state using its heavy hand for some of these things. And also, we elect our fire commissioners, we elect our, city council members, we elect our county commissioners, we elect these people and then entrust them to do these things. And I will tell you, these people with these, experiencing these worryingly slow fire response times, they didn't care. They were mad at me. Right. I'd been in my job for all of, 3 weeks. They just wanted someone to fix the problem. And so it's a tough thing. I'm not saying this is easy, but I'm saying that I think more local control is usually gets us to a better outcome, because those are also the people who are going to take those calls. Mike Moyle's not going to hear from someone who, the House Speaker, he's not going to hear from someone whose house burned down because the response time was too slow. Those people are going to be getting mad at the mayor, those local people, the same people they call when there are potholes. Right. But he wants to say, whether or not the budget should be able to grow by 10% if the population grows by 10%. And he's saying no.
Could we do this? You and I planned on just doing a quick half hour. I feel like we have not scratched. And again, I really appreciate you coming. It's already been a half an hour. It was wild to me. We are just scratching the surface, because I was about to ask you, like, okay, well, like, let's flush out a solution for property tax. It's like, there's no way we're doing, but could we do this? I want to keep having this conversation with you. I want to understand how we've gotten to this point and what you and other Democratic leaders feel like is a more viable solution. Because I hear the problem that you're talking about, which is, again, the government closest to the people is generally the best government. And the people up at the state level generally aren't going to hear the fallout of potholes, fire, bad response time, things like that. But these are complex problems, right? Like we had it's my understanding that there are a lot of people, as Mike Moyle had told me, he was like, there are a lot of people whose property taxes were going up, and HB 389 was designed to protect those people from people like me, Matt, who, move in here and am part of the problem with housing shortage and whatnot, which I totally understand. Like I own that. That's on me. So I would love to hear more about this. And again, I want to stick to what we said, which was just a quick half hour. Will you please come back?
Absolutely.
Will you please come back? We can allot like a 2-hour time frame if you want. I'll get coffee and tea, whatever. But like, let's flush these out, because we need a competition of ideas for problems. Right. And that's one big concern I have. I came from a one-party state and I now live in another one-party state effectively. And they're different parties, right? One was Democrat, one's Republican. But we need the competition of ideas to come up with the better solutions, the best solutions. Yeah. And I'm not saying I have any of them because I'm an idiot. But what I do know is the more people that talk and tease these things out, the better opportunity we'll have at finding the most optimal solution.
Yeah. And with everything we talked about today, it's not the Democratic versus the Republican solution. It's really kind of been like specific Republicans at the state level versus Republicans at the local level. My solutions are in line with what Republican county commissioners advocated for years, what Republican mayors and city council members advocated for years. So just to say that these things don't cut across clean party lines, but what happens with a legislature that's tilted really far in one direction, and then a few people gain a whole bunch of power because they sit in leadership, and then they can make the decisions for their entire caucus, and then we don't have the discussions there that we need to be having. I could talk taxes all day, so this has been fun, but I would love to come back and talk about other things.
Yes, let's do it. Well, a half an hour is obviously an error in judgment, because I'm genuinely interested in all of these things. So thank you for coming in today. Thank you for representing the minority party. I appreciate you. Let's schedule another one.
All right, sounds great. Look forward to it.